Good afternoon and welcome to this Reformed Church Center program where we talk about the World Communion of Reformed Churches and Reformed Ecumenism. Since its founding in June of 2010, the World Communion of Reformed Churches has been at the forefront of world ecumenical discussions. It has 232 member denominations and works on behalf of 80 million Reformed Christians globally. For 10 of those 24 years, two members of the Reformed Church in America have been a crucial part of the World Communion's work. One of those is Lisa Vander Wal. Lisa is an RCA Minister of Word and Sacrament, recently retired from full-time ministry, but like so many of us dealing with retirement by working full-time for other things. She has a Master of Divinity degree from Calvin Seminary, a Doctor of Ministry degree from New Brunswick, and she was the vice president, then past president of the RCA's General Synod from 2010 to 2013. She has been active in ecumenical work in the RCA and will soon, actually next year, complete her term on the executive committee of the World Communion of Reformed Churches as a vice president representing the Caribbean and North American Area Council, or CANAAC. Lisa and her husband David, who has, by the way, the one perfect birthday in the year, reside in Niskayuna, New York, and they have 2 adult children and 2 grandchildren. Phil Tanis holds the record for being the youngest mayor ever in Holland, Michigan. Held the record for being the youngest mayor in Michigan, but some twerp just beat him out of that. He has recently completed a decade of service for the WCRC as Executive Secretary for Communications, Executive Secretary for Communications and Operations, Executive Secretary for Communications and Operations as part of the Collegial General Secretariat, and Transitional Director for Communications and General Counsel Preparations, all based in Hanover, Germany. If you are surprised by hearing that he's had all of those different titles, you obviously do not work at New Brunswick or you do not work on GSC staff. If you worked in either of those places, this whole idea of rotating titles would not surprise you at all. And prior to going to the WCRC, Phil did work on GSC staff and in Grand Rapids, and so probably had a bunch of titles there. His political development work in Bulgaria for the International Republican Institute included the country's first presidential primary election. He's married to the Reverend Dr. Gretchen Skoontanis, an RCA Minister of Word and Sacrament, and they have 2 children, and they have just returned to Michigan and are trying to convince their children that, no, it's just like Hanover. It's just like Hanover, except more Dutch, I guess. Phil and Lisa are going to have a conversation now with each other and with all of us, talking about the work of the World Communion of Reformed Churches. They've got some slides to share. At the end of their conversation, we will all be invited into conversation as we usually are. And I will invite you to raise electronic hands. So find that little button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and be ready for that. I give you Phil and Lisa.
Thank you, James. It's good to be here. Lisa and I have a short-ish presentation to go through to orient everyone around what the WCRC is. So I'm going to share that, and we'll begin. As James noted, the World Communion of Reformed Churches is a global Christian communion. We actually are closer to 100 million individuals from 230 different member churches. And although the WCRC is a relatively young organization, it's also a very old one because we can trace the WCRC's roots all the way back to 1875, when, and here speaking of titles, the Alliance of the Reformed Churches throughout the world holding the Presbyterian system was established in London. There were 21 different denominations involved in that from Europe and North America. Shortly thereafter, the Congregationalists also established a global or semi-global organization. And interestingly, despite what many of us would think is Reformed tradition of splitting and dividing, the World Communion as the World Alliance prior to this continued to grow. So the Congregationalists and the Presbyterians got together and formed the World Alliance. And then in 2010, the World Alliance of Reformed Churches got together with the Reformed Ecumenical Council, which itself had been started in the 1940s, to form the World Communion of Reformed Churches. Today, as noted, we've got over 230 member churches in over 105 countries. The one little tidbit I like to point out is the country with the most members in the WCRC is Indonesia, with about 24 members being there. And I think that's obviously a legacy of the Dutch Empire. So those of us in the RCA, those are our close cousins, and we are all in the communion together. I'll invite now Lisa to give some of the underpinnings of the WCRC to you all.
Thank you, Phil. The Accra Confession, which is a confession that was created in 2004 in Accra, Ghana, was one that now gives us very much of the work that we do together. It was created actually in a chapel above where slaves had been held and eventually sent to our area of the world. And so it's fitting that this one would speak of the things that we do. It says, we believe, this is just one part, we believe that God is a God of justice. In a world of corruption, exploitation, and greed, God is in a special way the God of the destitute, the poor, the exploited, the wronged, and the abused, coming from Psalm 146. God calls for just relationships with all creation. Now, in that confession, we see a number of different parts of that justice work that we focus on as the WCRC. One is gender justice. We advocate for the inclusion of women in all aspects of ministry, but also in ordination. And there are still places where we struggle to have that happen, but we believe firmly in that. Also, racial justice, ecological justice, economic justice, and also the intersections between those things. For instance, you might have a woman of color who is poor, and the only place that she can afford to live is in a place that is quickly overwhelmed by floods if there's a hurricane or anything like that. So it really is the intersections between these that we also concentrate on it. Also, we believe from this that we are called from the Bible to have mutual flourishing, that it's not just paying attention to the wrongs of the world, but also calling us for right relations that help all of us to flourish. And some of the verses that we draw on in the Accra Confession is John 10:10, that Jesus said that he came that we might have life and have it abundantly. And also from Amos chapter 5, when the call is that justice roll down like rivers and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Next slide, please. We are, as it says in our documents, called to communion and committed to justice. The WCRC believes that communion and justice are inextricably connected. Communion without justice masks inequality, exclusion, and oppression. Justice without communion is in danger of becoming divisive. And here is one picture of the many voices and faces that we have within our communion. Next slide, please. Together, the whole of the communion works to renew and restore the economy of the earth so that all humanity and the whole of creation might live life in its fullness. When we talk about communion, it goes back to the word that we see in the Bible, in the New Testament, of koinonia, of this sense of working together, of being together, of sharing, and to work together to restore the fullness of life that God desires. And so that is, again, our biblical mandate. Next slide, please. The whole creation is the theater of God's glory and glorifies God by reflecting the divine intent for the flourishing of all. This tenet of John Calvin leads the WCRC to bring the resources of the Reformed theological and confessing tradition into the present tense through listening to and addressing the suffering and the cries of humanity and of all creation. Next slide, please. We believe that we are called to cultivate a just communion. This koinonia comes into being as a communion by the openness that allows the Holy Spirit to transform the individual, the community of believers, and the world as a whole. This communion emerges from the contributions of all people of faith, and therefore seeks to include persons and perspectives from the communion's rich diversity in every aspect of work together. And this is why it is a thing that we have together that we always thank God for, that we have these people coming from all of these different countries and people of different colors and races, and women and men and young people as well as old are invited into this project that we call the WCRC. Next slide, please. Covenanting for justice. The Accra Confession named empire as that overarching system under which we live and which as a church we are called to resist. This means that the WCRC is focused on economic, ecological, and gender justice, along with forming communities of full and just participation that are resilient against and are able to resist violence, racism, nationalism, authoritarianism, and militarism. Next slide, please. We also do theology. And we do theology for transformation, engaging with the unfinished agenda of the Reformation. The WCRC does theology contextually, beginning with discerning processes in which the voices of wounded communities receives special attention. This engagement, back up. In their cries, we hear the pain of the crucified God. This engagement leads to confessing the faith in language that addresses the present reality. Next slide, please. Engaging God's mission in a context of crisis. God's mission transforms the church into a missional communion that commits itself to God's work of renewal and transformation in collaboration with all people of goodwill, especially endeavoring to do mission from the margins in contexts of crisis and struggle. In this, most recently, we have been advocating with the situation in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in Kenya, Sudan, and other African countries, Zimbabwe, other places in the world where we know there is crisis happening, that we endeavor to be there with the crisis and to speak on behalf of those who are being oppressed and struggling through it. Most recently, in Ukraine, our president, the Reverend Najla Kassab, with others, went to Ukraine on behalf of the WCRC to really advocate that we come to a place of reconciliation and that the war might end. Next slide, please. Working with all the partners God provides. The WCRC believes that to be reformed is to be ecumenical. Reformed theology sees that God is at work also in other Christian traditions and understands that the unity of the church, while the Apostle Creed testifies, is already there, to which the Apostolic Creed testifies is already there. God gives unity as a gift and invites the church to receive this by reforming itself and its relationships to Christians of other traditions. When we were in our last General Council in Leipzig, Germany, we met with other communions with two documents that were signed that helped us to appreciate this ecumenical. To be reformed is to be ecumenical. One was called the Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification, one that actually came to our General Synod to be considered because it was talking about the different places in the world where we talk about justification. What does that mean? And in the different Christian traditions. And it was one that we had come to agreement with. And with the Lutherans being very much a part of that landscape in Leipzig in Germany, that they too were witnesses to that. The other document that we signed was the Wittenberg Witness, which works according to the Lund principle that we've often talked about in terms of the RCA and the CRC, that where there are things that can be done together, that we do it together and not just duplicate our efforts. And this has been something that has been witnessed to by United Methodist Federation and other parts of the Christian church. So it really is an ecumenical beyond the ecumenism that's part of the WCRC itself. Next slide, please. And with that, I turn it back over to Phil Tanis.
Thank you, Lisa. So what Lisa outlined there were the 5 programmatic areas in all their fancy terms: communion, justice, theology, mission, and ecumenical partnership. What I'm going to talk a little bit about now is how these actually manifest themselves in the programs that we work in. And these, let me first say, this is not everything the WCRC is doing. WCRC has an extremely small staff, but a large network of volunteers, and regional councils are also in play, all of which work together to have us punch above our weight, so to speak. Although we've got 100 million members, staff is about a dozen, and the work that they do is pretty extraordinary. And what I'm going to talk to you about is just a bit of a few of the highlights, but certainly not everything that's happening. So under economic justice, we work ecumenically with the World Council of Churches, the Lutheran World Federation, the Methodists, Mennonites, and others, the Council for World Mission, under an umbrella called the New International Financial and Economic Architecture, which is another mouthful. We call it NAFIA. And a couple of the projects that we do, one of which here is the Zacchaeus Tax Project. It's a biblically based justice campaign that advocates for tax justice. That also includes, addressing social and ecological debts and reparations at all levels. Our regional council down in Latin America has been particularly engaged in this, as they find from country to country that the tax systems are not only unjust but corrupt. And so they've been taking this on to work with tax experts, to work with political leaders, other social justice, civil activists to advocate for a restructuring of the tax system to accommodate the needs of all the people and not just the very rich. There's a booklet that's available on the WCRC website that could fully engage you in this if you'd be interested in something like that. Our main mission program right now is what's known as GRAPE, the Global Reformed Advocacy Platforms for Engagement. And you can see the bullet points down there below. I'll summarize in saying that we are working with local activists, both in the church and civil society, as well as experts, to create networks that would advocate for specific social issues and justice issues on local levels, but also then through the WCRC connecting to the global level, where we can make our presence felt at the United Nations and in other global bodies. Right now, there are 2 projects going, one in South Africa for, I've lost the term, basically basic income, so that everyone is given a basic income so that they can survive to deal with the poverty levels there. And then in Kenya, they're advocating for water justice and water resources to ensure that everyone has water that's drinkable and usable. These 2 programs have graduated, so to speak, their first round of activists. They've now engaged with a second group, so the network continues to grow out in those areas. And the hope is that more of these great projects can be started in other countries on other issues of whatever is determined by the local churches and activists is the most important. We all know that climate justice is a big thing and an important thing, and the executive committee a couple of years ago declared a decade for climate justice. Through this, we are actively engaging with our member churches to support them in the work that they're doing, especially in the Pacific Islands, where it is an existential crisis as the threat of rising oceans grows. And in other areas, including on the top level in the COP, different COP meetings, to bring a voice of advocacy, especially for the people who are most impacted by the growing crisis and who often aren't given an ear or a voice at the table. We also work with Seasons of Creation, which is an annual ecumenical event that tries to raise the consciousness of the importance of climate justice and trying to mitigate the damage that we've done and actually care for the earth as we've been told to do by God. The GEM School is another one of the ecumenical economic justice programs that the WCRC is involved in. Again, a long name, the Ecumenical School on Governance, Economics, and Management for an Economy of Life, brings together 30 to 40 people every year, mostly younger church leaders, but a fairly wide range in ages. They go into a different country every year to discuss the economic situation in that country where advocacy is needed, and also to give these church leaders the tools, the knowledge, the terms, the wherewithal to advocate for economic justice in their own contexts. So I don't know how many of you are ministers, but I don't think you probably took an economic course in seminary, and yet your parishioners could be, under economic strain, and especially in many parts of the world, our WCRC members are. This gives the tools and the knowledge for local ministers to become advocates for their parishioners on matters of economic need and justice. Lisa mentioned that the WCRC is involved in global peace initiatives. She mentioned Ukraine, where we continue to support our member church there, which thankfully is in the western part of the country, abutting Hungary, but is definitely impacted. There are other non-member churches scattered throughout Ukraine. And we've been working also with our member churches in the border countries to support the refugees coming from Ukraine in various ways. But longer-term programs that we've been involved in for peace and justice include Cameroon, where there's a split between the English and the French-speaking provinces. In Colombia, where the rebels, so to speak, have been giving up their arms in peace agreements, and yet friction remains, oftentimes leading to violence. So we walk with our the Presbyterian Church in Colombia there, as well as an ecumenical effort to try and broker peace and bring justice to that area. The Korean Peninsula, our member churches in South Korea are actively engaged in working towards an actual peace agreement to replace the armistice, with a long-term goal of reuniting that peninsula. And we've also acted as a bridge to the North Korean Christians who still remain and still worship and want to be in touch with their brothers and sisters outside of their country. And then throughout the Middle East, we've been involved. We have one member church in the Palestinian areas, but many member churches in Lebanon and Syria and Egypt, all of which have been impacted by, over the decades, by the tensions with Israel, and most definitely now with what's happening there. And we walk with them and provide services as we can to them. And advocate for them on the global level. And then we also support member churches as issues arise, whether it be flooding, an outbreak of civil strife, the need for some advocacy, and we work with them as best we can, rallying the communion to prayer, trying to funnel resources of finances or human power where they would best be served. So those are just a few of the areas that the WCRC is involved in. One more. Theological dialogues. We bring together theologians on the global level to meet with other Christian communions. Lisa mentioned at our last General Council in Leipzig, this paid benefits to us with the JDDJ signing, as well as the agreement with the Lutherans. We continue to have ongoing dialogues with a number of different groups, and right now, most critically with the Mennonites, as we bridge historical, violent histories with them to come to new understandings and ways to cooperate on issues that are of importance to all of us. I mentioned the regional councils. We have them in Africa, Latin America, Europe, and Asia, and also in this region. And Lisa's going to talk a little bit about CANAAC and what's been happening there recently.
Thank you, Phil. I became involved with the CANAAC, the Caribbean and North American Area Council, way back in 2011. So I've had quite a long history now with them. We come together as a very disparate council, because we are not only in North America with notably the PCUSA, the RCA, the CRC, and other denominations, the United Church of Canada, Presbyterian Church of Canada, but mostly we focus when we meet together on meeting in the Caribbean, because it is often true that in order to hold it, it's virtually impossible to get the visas that are needed to come into the US. It has been more possible in Canada, but even so, we tend to go to places in the Caribbean which give us a bit of a sense of the challenges that they face. We just recently, in fact, I just got back about a week ago from the meeting, and it was held in Grand Cayman, primarily because our last convener was from there, and it was a wonderful bringing together of people from the region as well as the Reformed Church in America. Eddie Alleman was there, as well as Zachary King from the CRC and others. What we try to do in this is to focus on the needs of our community in both of the regions, which are so disparate. One of the things that we heard a lot about at this last meeting was the violence that is occurring in the region, notably in Haiti and other places, where just to get to the idea of how to combat it, but also what are the contributing factors, and how do we protect our young people from getting involved in the violence that has been systemic there for some time. But the regional council has really focused a lot on racism. Also, ecological justice is particularly important in the region of Caribbean, as we know, through all of the hurricanes that have come through most recently, but historically, and that they are in many cases very susceptible to issues of justice with respect to that. Also, issues in places we have been. We met in Jamaica, and we went to see places where domestic violence and violence against women were extremely prevalent. And so that is one thing that we have tried to focus on, but also economic justice. There is a tremendous amount of poverty in many of the islands and the region there. And so we try to advocate with and for them as well. As Phil mentioned, we are one of 6 formal regions. We have an area council that is in Europe and in the Lebanon, the Middle East is part of that. We have one in Asia, and we have one in Latin American, Latin-speaking or Hispanic-speaking in Latin America, as well as ours, and also in Africa. So we come from various places, and we come with different challenges. One thing I want to mention too is that during COVID, we were not able, as most programs were not able to continue in the form that they had been planned, but we came together under a program called COVID-19 and Beyond. And we tried to bring people from all over the United States and the world to come together, each region, with the challenges that they faced, but also to pair the challenges that were brought on by COVID, but also the populations that were most affected. For instance, one was disability concerns. And in the region of Indonesia and in that Asian region, there were many where people who have disabilities were incredibly affected by COVID, as well as in general. So we tried to bring out the places where these injustices were taking place, but also to sort of marry them to the region in which they were most prevalent. And so these are ways in which the regional councils can be effective in the places where we live and work. I think the Caribbean and North American area councils faces some particular challenges because we are in such very different places. And it's difficult to, for instance, to just go to a place because, like I said, the visa issues, and by their very nature, islands are separated from one another. And so with Zoom and other aspects of technology, we are able to find more ways to work together and to advocate. And this has been incredibly important to us. And I was recently, as I said, at this last General Assembly, and we elected a new steering committee, which will be working. And again, it comes from all different places in the region, and it does reflect, as we said, all of the colors and the languages, and so that are in this region and in God's world. Next slide, please. General Council. I came onto the executive committee back in 2014, around the same time that Philip became on staff at the WCRC. So we were both involved in the planning for the General Council 26th. And that took place in, as I mentioned, Leipzig, Germany. And the general councils, when they come together, we come from all of our member communions, and our constitution dictates how many people can be sent based on the membership. And it also includes having paid our dues as churches, as member communions. But as we come together, we are there and we bring together different concerns, and those come together and are brought together in a discernment process, much like the discernment process that the RCA has used. And Philip and I were part of the architects of making that work at the council. But what it allowed for us to do is to be in groups. We could ask questions. We brought the concerns before the body, and then that came up for discernment. And instead of a parliamentary yes or no, it was a sense of, do you feel warm to this idea or cool, and how can we come together in agreement? And it was, for me, almost a miraculous thing how we could come together and bring quite a number of resolutions that were then incorporated into our strategic plan that was created after the assembly. And that is what we then work according to as we go into the next season before the next council. Typically, our general councils meet every 7 years. Because of COVID, we have delayed our next general council, which was why, as the blurb said that I was the former vice president. Well, I'm still vice president because our next general council will be next October instead of having been this year. And it will take place in Chiang Mai, Thailand in October, a year hence. And the council's theme has arisen partly out of COVID, when it was very difficult to be the church, and where we felt as an executive committee that it was important to help us to understand how we can persevere in our witness, in our work, and inspired by Hebrews 12, verse 1. And so that theme will guide the gathering and is a strong biblical call to remain true to the faith we have in Jesus Christ and continue to strive for the promise of an abundant life for all. That council will be is already in process. We have a number of different initiatives that will come. For instance, I have a daughter with disabilities, and so I am part of the disability task force that will bring a paper to the General Council to discuss how we might be more helpful with being advocates for those with people with disabilities. And that is just one of many who will come, which papers and initiatives that will come before the council. We also typically will do pre-councils for women and for youth. This time we'll be doing caucuses that will be different ones that will take place during the course of the General Council that will address some of the specific needs of the people who come. In our guidelines for being able to bring people to the General Council, there are, in our Constitution, some mandates for bringing men and women and also youth, because we definitely want to strive and do strive to have young people involved, not only in the work of the communion in general, but also in the General Council itself. We have had typically one vice president who is someone who is under 30 as they are elected at the General Council, and that has been our practice, and it is wonderful to have that voice at the table when the executive committee meets, and the officers do as well. And then through the process of the General Council, an executive committee is created, which is according to, in some ways, a grid, trying to have people from every region, men and women, youth, and these people then come together as an executive committee that then takes care takes forward the work that is decided and challenged to us. And in the course, as I said, then we create a strategic plan, and that dictates how we come together. One thing, too, I wanted to mention is that we do have interns in the office in Hanover who help to do the work. And those are typically young people who come from regions where our churches are located, and they come together to help the work. And it's exciting to see someone who had worked as an interim now come in as the communications person in Phil's absence now. And so it does help us to bring up people from our ranks in the church to come together to be able to do the work of the communion. As Philip also mentioned, we have a very small staff. But one of the exciting things that did happen in the last couple of years is that we were able to open an office in Rome. And the officers met, and it was also in conjunction with Reformation Day, which typically we will also have a televised one that you can access from all over the world, a Reformation Day service that, again, celebrates our unity in Christ. But also the fact that in that office now in Rome, we have an ability to liaison with the other offices for the Lutheran World Federation, the Methodist, World Methodist Federation, and we're hopeful and making inroads to have some sort of dialogue and work with the Catholic Church there as well. So all of those things are exciting, and but we have a very small staff who put together all of these things, and that's why Phil's work has been particularly important, as well as those others who are in that position. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to your questions can, if you have others about that, but I'm going to turn it back to Phil about the challenges that we'd like you to think about with us.
Yeah, so as we were discussing what we were going to present a couple of days ago, we also talked about some of the challenges facing not only the WCRC, but the ecumenical world in general. We all know denominationally there are challenges with splits and declining attendance and everything. And the global Christian groups are not immune to that because the denominations are the members, of course. But there are also unique challenges then that are being faced by the WCRC and others. And we're just going to name three of them and maybe discuss a little bit about them before we open up for questions. The first is engagement, and we frame that with the question, how do individuals become involved with a global ecumenical organization? I mean, here's a group, we're global with a small staff doing very specific things. How does one get involved? And how does then the global be able to spread the word of what they're doing and actually engage people? And so the Zacchaeus Tax project is fantastic, but it goes nowhere unless people pick it up down in the grassroots level. The one thing I want to say about that before I see what Lisa might say is that the RCA has been very involved with the WCRC through Lisa's and my involvement, and I'm happy to note that RCA involvement will continue despite whatever the executive committee looks like after the next general council, because Chelsea and Jeff Lampin are headed to Hanover later this year to not only take up the reins as pastors at a church, an English language church there that my wife began, but Chelsea will also be on the staff of the WCRC in a part-time capacity as the liaison to the Caribbean and North America and the CANAAC region, where she'll be helping with engagement of member churches and denominations and involvement there. But Lisa, what do you think? How do people become involved? I mean, we both came in different ways, but I think it's more viable in your way that people are more likely to get involved because there aren't that many staff members.
Absolutely. Well, one way I think is theologically. We do have different groups that are part of how are we thinking theologically about just our confessions, on all of those sorts of things. And so we do invite people who have theological background and a particular efficacy with that they can be a part of the different groups that we put together. And that's not just theology, but people who have a particular interest in some of the other things that we mentioned, that if you were to look at the website and you can, for instance, there see all of the different programs that we have, to reach out to us or to reach out to the WCRC and say, I have particular interest in this. I would love to be involved. Can you tell me more? In what way can I be involved? And some of these ways are through the different task forces that we have for various interests. So I think that's one thing. Certainly, we do have a desire to have people at the various councils that we have. I think we are able to bring 4 people to the next general council by the numbers that we have, according to what Eddie tells me about our numbers now in the RCA. And we would love to see a woman or a man who are under 30 who have a particular interest. If you have an idea for that, to reach out to us and to say, we think this person to name to Eddie that person would be a good person to go. So that's one way. But there are any number of different things that we could put you on in touch with people who would be interested in your expertise and interest in a particular thing. So that is one way I think that we can become engaged. Anything else that you think, Phil?
Well, I mean, if there are, and I'll name the Zach Tax Project again, but if there are initiatives that, again, you can find on the WCRC website that are of interest to you that may be applicable to your congregational setting or your regional setting, the WCRC folks are more than happy to help resource you with that, not only with materials, but with expertise. If you want to start your own Zach Tax movement in New England or out in Iowa or wherever, we have the resources to at least, get you up and running, if not, support financially. That kind of leads into the relevance question. I'm going to skip sustainability because we got a follow-up slide on that too. But the WCRC talks in very big and bold ways about justice for the earth and ecological justice and tax justice and things. But how does that become relevant, do you think, in impacting not only just its member denominations, but down into congregations and such, especially from a North American context, do you think, Lisa?
Well, I think one of the ways that I think it's important is just to start with the various places where we already involved in ecumenism. We have always had this partnership between RCA and CRC. We're very closely connected to, I think, to expand upon those sorts of dialogues that we have. I think the same thing for the formula of agreement. Both the Presbyterian Church USA and the United Church of Christ are very involved in the work of the WCRC and with CANAAC. And so I think as we are working with those, I know that in my own particular context in New York, when I was in ministry in my first parish here for 10 years, we had a group of ministers that met every Tuesday to talk about the lectionary, even if we weren't preaching about it. But we were able to say, okay, what is really concerning to you in that context? I think when we are in our places here to say, okay, when we are with people who are CRC, how could we work on some things together, and how might the WCRC give us tools to do that? I think similarly with the formula of agreement, working with, say, Karen Georgia Thompson from the United Church of Christ, who's such a blessing to us all, and she has a wealth of wisdom and connections that we might be able to learn from each other. Same thing, like PCUSA is very involved in justice work in various places. When I was in, I think it was in Jamaica, that no, actually in Cuba, I was there for a executive committee meeting, and a project water project that the PCUSA put together so that the whole community, as well as the church, could have sufficient water in their place. Those are some of the things that I think we can impact our members, but also as we do our ecumenical work here, to realize it isn't only local, but it is global, but it isn't always global, it is also local. I think to marry those things together, to realize that there are resources, but also that you can give us resources to say, these are things that are happening, how might that be helpful in another place? So I think there is a great deal of relevance that can be seen in all of the different ways that the justices and the theology that we had talked about earlier.
And I think, again, if you find something that seems that it could work, or that you'd like to engage in on the congregational level, reach out to Lisa or to Chelsea, and they can then put you in touch with the proper people on the global level, and even connect you then back locally if you want to provide support to our member in Palestine, or to our members in Lebanon or South Africa or Indonesia or wherever. Connections can be made. I think that's one of the things that I came away with after a decade with the WCRC. One of the best parts of it was the connections and the friendships that were made around the world. So now when there's, for instance, more saber rattling over around Taiwan, I've got friends in Taiwan. So I feel it in a different way. And I'm sure Lisa's feels the same on that front.
Absolutely.
The other way you could get involved is through sustainability. Just like with denominations struggling, not only in North America, but in Northern Europe, which is where the bulk of the financial support comes for the WCRC. The WCRC suffers, and one of the reasons that we have a smaller staff is because we don't ask as much of our members as other ecumenical groups, or we don't seek out other forms of revenue, such as the Lutherans have dedicated themselves to diaconal work. And that's the bulk of what they do. We have put our priorities elsewhere, and you can't just get grants as easily if you can't show a specific project helping people very specifically with water or building a road or whatever. But we have been putting together combinations of financial support from a variety of people to increase our staff. The Rome office is one. Our mission executive is another example, so that we can increase the work that we do. But the WCRC, just as I was leaving, was launching a new campaign to ask individuals to become involved simply by giving $10 a year. if the 100 million members of the WCRC would each give $10 a year, we wouldn't be able to spend that much money. But wouldn't that be something? And so, just a final pitch: if you're so moved, there are ways that you could even donate, $50 one off, or $10 a month, or whatever. It all helps. The work of the WCRC, especially leading into the next General Council, where one of the largest line items there is to create enough funding to ensure that all members can be represented, whether they have the financial means or not. The RCA, despite its challenges, can send 4 people to Thailand for this meeting. Many of the WCRC's member churches cannot even afford to send one. And yet we're asking them to pony up a certain amount of money. I think it's about €1,000 towards their participation, with the promise of covering the rest so that the whole of the communion can meet. So that's one very particular need in the coming year. But I think we agree that the work of the WCRC is critical, important. It's known as kind of the cutting edge of justice issues, and the rest of the ecumenical world often follows along, and we'd like it to remain as such. So please consider getting involved that way even. And with that, I'm going to stop the screen share and invite James to...
And I'm going to encourage people to start raising their little electric hands and see if we can get a conversation going. And Chelsea, you're sharing a lot there out in the chat. Can I bring you in to talk?
Hello.
Hi, Chelsea.
Hi, Chelsea.
Hey, friends. It's just so great to be a part of this. And as Bill was saying, that Lisa and we can connect with you all with the office and with the staff. I'm learning as we're growing. So if you have questions and I don't have an answer, I will be asking somebody, but I'm really excited to be connecting and collaborating. And I put my email in the chat too.
Thank you. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
Sometimes we are slow to get started, but I'm hoping that we do. I'm going to throw a question out to both of you, though. If there were one thing that the World Communion could be doing that they aren't doing, what would that be? What would your wish be?
Well, one thing that we had been doing, which we've had to cease doing because of financial challenges, is a project called the Reformed Partnership Fund. This was started a good number of years ago, before our time there, and it brought in money from granting agencies and member churches, member denominations, and would then solicit applications from other members for projects to help support their work in ministry or social justice. And so it was, and then the Partnership Fund Committee would give out grants anywhere from 5,000 to 50,000 euros to support member churches in their work around the world. Our last funding source of that dried up, I think, 2 years ago. And it still exists. And sometimes a member church will say, hey, can you help us move some money to another member? And we use that conduit to do so. But it'd be really great if we could, find a place to get 100, 200,000 euros a year to redistribute to those who have great projects, but no funding.
Lisa?
Yeah, one thing I would say that we have some good partners through the world. We have the Bread for the World, Brot für die Welt, that is located in Germany, that provides a lot of funding for the work that we do, and so that is a real blessing. We are also connected with Council for a World Mission, and have a lot of collaboration between those things. I think what I would wish we would do better and have a better mechanism is really our communication department, as Phil has done it so well, does every which way you can, whether it's Facebook or the website and all of these things. But somehow I wish that we could do a better job of really reaching into congregations. And that's something I would challenge. If people have ideas for those sorts of things to be able to help us be more effective in different places, I think that would be helpful. And that's no, not for lack of trying, but to find new ways to really connect with people. Again, given the disparate nature of our global work. As far as anything I wish we were doing that we're not doing, again, a lot of is dependent upon staff. I want to ask Phil the answer to this question. How many resolutions did we come out of the last General Council with? Something like 60, 57?
Something like that, yeah. 6.
And it...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
With directed action, yeah, there were more than that, but I think 60 mandates to take on, which is not possible with the staffing level.
Right. And so somehow to build networks in regions, like say among the Formula of Agreement, that we could actually say we want to help with a particular thing. How can we here in the U.S. do something, or in the Caribbean? I think there are ways that we can be a better world communion that's both global and local. That whole global thing. If we come up with some ways to do it, and interest, that is continually the thing as well.
Thank you. Tom Goodhart.
So thank you, both Lisa and Phil. I'm so grateful for both of you and all that you do. And you too, James. Grateful for you too. I'm wondering about, I appreciated your questions, the challenges that you are facing. As you are both aware, congregants so often wonder what was their formula assessment brings them, what does it give them, what does it provide, or now covenant share, what does that provide? Not a great attitude. There's a lot of problems with that, but you're aware of that entire situation. But it sets up the question, what does the World Communion of Reformed churches provide to the local congregant? And specifically here, I'm speaking the local RCA congregant. What would you suggest is the best way that the average congregant, who may be overwhelmed with all sorts of things going on in the world, can connect to the work / dare I call it information that you provide? And I preface this by saying you've already offered some wonderful suggestions, sending our under 30 folks to be involved, the Zacchaeus Project. All those are great, but what specifically would you say the average congregant would you suggest?
Good question, Tom. I think, for me, I came into this totally unaware of what was happening in the WCRC. When I came in as someone that was delegated as the vice president of the General Synod of the RCA to go to Dominican Republic for a meeting of something that was called the World Communion of Reformed Churches, and I wasn't sure at all what it was. And I came and I was blown away by, number one, the fact that the RCA was not the center of the world. It's part of it, but it's not the center. Number two, it even just in the place that we met, dengue fever was making a comeback, and I had to throw away my toothbrush because I wet it through the tap water, and I wasn't supposed to do that. I was there for a few days. That was their constant situation. I was blown away by the poverty and the challenges there. And I guess why I'm saying that is that sometimes it helps us as congregants to even be aware of what our brothers and sisters around the world are struggling with. And sometimes, at least for me, it makes me see my own particular situation differently when I understand what other people are facing. I think that's what COVID and beyond did for us so much, is to realize all of those different places of real pain that we had programmatic stuff planned for it, but we heard it from the voices of those who did it, and so, or who were part of it. So I think for me, again, I would love to see pastors and particularly pastors who like yourself, who are committed to justice issues, to say, check on this. Maybe it will help you to see information-wise, but also maybe there's a way in which you can connect in this situation in a way that will give you life as well. That sounds nebulous, but I know for me, since 2011, I have been a different person because of the places I have been and seen. And not everybody can go there, but I think we can start to appreciate what it is we're trying to do. And so somehow, maybe it's a way for people to say, number one, it does matter to get outside of our little boxes. Number two, it does matter that we are part of a larger church. And maybe that comes out, I know it does for me in my preaching and just my conversations with people. So that doesn't sound real concrete, but that's one thing.
I would say too that it's it is a challenge on a global organization, and the WCRC is a membership organization, and the members are the denominations. So we relate to denominational heads first, with the aspiration of having an impact in the congregations. Everything Lisa said is right. If you can get involved, that's going to be a huge impact. But for your congregation itself, Lisa had mentioned earlier, every year there's a Reformation Sunday that's not only live streamed to be that you can engage in, but the liturgy is put out ahead of time with materials that you could incorporate into your own Reformation Day service, or the World Communion service on a regular basis. And this happened with the climate justice last year. The WCRC will produce materials for different seasons. Lent is a particularly popular one for us because it's, you can get into justice there very easily. So look for those sorts of resources that you can then bring into your congregation as well. Zach Tax is one that's applicable worldwide. Our push on to ordain women, not as relevant for us because we're there in the RCA and CRC. The other would be just to to see if there's connections that can be made. If you read about a church congregation struggling, seeking prayers in another part of the world, you don't have to just stop with the prayer, although prayers are invited, connections directly to that congregation, and those people can be made, and that's where you can reach out even more than you would be able to otherwise, because the communion does connect people and connects them pretty well when asked.
Yeah, and I would echo, I think there are a lot of resources that can go into congregations. Congregations where my husband, now that I'm retired, we're worshiping, is extremely involved with ecological concerns, and they have a whole package of things that they put out to the congregation how to be more ecumenical or ecologically minded, and a lot of those are also could be had in terms of the whole WCRC that I think would help for the average congregation.
JJ Tenclay.
Hello, friends. Thank you for having this important conversation. Phil, you may have just answered part of my question, but in my work, obviously, I work with a lot of refugees and displaced people all over the world, which also means I'm working with ecumenical partners in those countries. One of the things that I hear repeatedly is, why don't people care about the mass death, destruction, despair, and devastation that's happening within my community, within my country, within my region of the world? So why don't people care? And where is the church in the midst of this? And so I guess I have a couple of questions for you. How do you decide as a worldwide body, how do you help people be seen in the midst of this devastation and despair that they are experiencing, especially as members of the WCRC? And how do you invite people into that space of also seeing those member communions that are struggling, and to enter in and be the church for them during this really difficult time?
So first, I think that the basis of what we do gets laid down at the general councils and then the executive committees. And as we noted, the 60 resolutions passed, many of them are specifically directed to raise awareness of and support members that are struggling through all sorts of different challenges and in all sorts of different ways. The executive committee, which meets annually, meets in a different part of the world every year, and just specifically to be in touch with the communion there, to learn the member church's struggles and challenges there, and to lift those up. And it's been everywhere. The last one, my last one, just this last May, was in West Michigan, and we learned the struggles of racism, and it opened in Christian nationalism, and it really opened the eyes and resonated with members of the executives, specifically from Brazil, but from around the world too, where they're struggling with those same sorts of things. And out of each of these, then, each executive committee, a statement is made to try and raise awareness. These sorts of things then guide the staff as crises erupt around the world in the shaping of messaging. And the one particular mechanism is a call to prayer and support that is sent out to all our member churches, typically signed by our general secretary, where specific prayer requests are made, specific financial resources are requested, but we try to, in a brief letter, just alert people to the crisis and the need of the people, and to bring it, at the very minimum, prayer and some awareness. If these are longer term issues, as we've noted in a couple of instances, we'll send delegations into those areas We've gone into Ukraine a number of times. That was my first trip, actually, back in 2015, because Russia had already invaded then, minimally compared to now. But the impacts were already being felt, and most of the world was just shrugging their shoulders. So we go into those areas to try and then raise awareness through, media reports and things, but then also just to be with people. I remember at dinner I sat with the bishop of the church there, and I just asked him how he was doing. And he just started crying because nobody actually asked him that yet, and just to have that little impact too. Mounting delegations into some areas is difficult, but we try and get to where we can have that sort of impact as a communion, whether it's through the regional body or through the global. So I would invite you, JJ, because I know you've got your hand on the pulse in some of the most difficult areas. If there are places where an ecumenical group can go in to support the people on the ground as even as just a demonstration, even just briefly, let Lisa and Chelsea know and see whether the WCRC can be involved in that.
Yeah, and I would say Chelsea and I were both part of a panel discussion on migration and those sorts of issues in the CANAAC meeting. And it was really interesting to hear. It was led by a woman who is on the executive committee from Germany. And as you know, they struggle with how to address the situation of the migrants and refugees are there. And so, but it was interesting to see that it wasn't just there, it was in the Caribbean. There are a number of places where this is a very concerning situation. And I think Chelsea would be able to say if that was televised, that perhaps or recorded, that might be something that you would particularly enjoy.
She's responding in the chat that yes, it is. Elvis Alvarez.
Hello, Lisa and Phil. Thanks for the all this valuable information that you're sharing with us. Of course, I'm Elvis from the Hispanic Reformed Church in Gothenburg, New Jersey. And a lot of the topics that you're covering practically resonates with me and also with our congregation, where we all seem to be confronted with lots of challenges. And those challenges come in different forms and shapes in relation to the geographical locations. Like, for instance, in Africa, famine, it's a major problem where they need like the basic utilities such as water, that they lack of it. And in Europe, in Ukraine, we have the issues with the war. And as Christians that we are, sometimes we feel like we need to get involved in ways that how can we deliver positive change to these areas? And in our congregation, for as small as it is, of course, and financially challenged, we initiated a program to support, to create a support in Honduras, in a remote area in the mountains where they lack not only educational programs or even Christian presence like of churches. And we started delivering apparel, shoes, whatever we could send there. The last shipment we sent consisted of almost 2,000 pounds worth of apparel and shoes. So I see the challenges that the WCRC is being confronted with, and I posted on the chat if a list of donors will facilitate the cause at hand, because I know that this list, it's It's a list of major donors for the Christian causes. And our congregation or my staff, we do not have the resources to follow up, to send petitions of for donations with stories of changes that the WRC or the RCA are making worldwide, because it requires a thorough follow-up and like I just mentioned, a story behind to request a donation. So the list that I have consists of approximately 3,000 donors in the US, and it shows the history of each individual as to the causes that they donate. And I think it's a tool that if someone may be capable of giving it the attention that it deserves, that there will be some positive results. And I like to share that with your group and hopefully contribute, I guess, with my little grain of assistance for the cause.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful to know.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure Secretary Naomi, the interim general secretary, would love to see that list.
I guess Dr. Brom, I could share the list with Dr. Brom, and then he could share it with the powers to be that are in charge of whatever programs where it could best be used.
Elvis, I was going to say, send me an email, and I will make an online introduction between you and Chelsea later this afternoon.
Perfect.
And Chelsea is able to do that stuff.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, and I
Okay.
appreciate the information that you guys are sharing with us right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chelsea, why don't you go ahead? Okay, your hand went back up again. Good. Go ahead and talk.
Actually, I'm going to let Jeff say it because then both of
Okay.
us are here.
So as everybody might know, we're together with RCA Global Mission and in this new partnership with WCRC. And we were just reflecting on our experience together with missionaries from the Christian Reformed Church, and how beneficial our relationships with them were during our time in Romania. We were reflecting on times where we were able to go on retreats with them and work together with them, and just have cross-pollinate ideas and everything. And we were wondering if there was any avenue with the WCRC for more people who are abroad throughout the world as missionaries to be put together with other missionaries within their different contexts, like other member denominations within the WCRC, talking, PCUSA or UCC mission personnel throughout the world, or within the specific countries in which they're already working too.
Yeah, I think too, like just bouncing off even the idea of the work that's happening with Grape in Kenya, is there a way that we can bring in our RCA people into that conversation too?
That's a really good question. I
Right.
think in theory, yes, absolutely. The more networking we do, for instance, in Sudan and South Sudan, in the time when the countries were splitting, the WCRC worked with both PCUSA and RCA missionaries in the area, and we sent a delegation in with their support, and there the RCA and PCUSA were fairly well connected anyway, and we relied on them for that. The mission agencies coming out of North America and South Korea especially are much bigger than the WCRC, with many more resources. But if the WCRC can help connect folks together in different areas, I think that would be great. Realistically, how that's done with the small staff is the challenge. But Chelsea, I'd throw that back to you, and maybe you can start with the North American mission groups, mission agencies, and see whether you might get a conversation going.
I'm already WhatsApping with JJ, so perfect.
I think, in light of that, what you're just saying, I think it would be helpful too if the regional people who are in each of these regions actually could give information in terms of how to reach mission personnel or whatever. I could certainly, at the executive committee, see if we could bring together some sort of a network of people with that in mind. I think that's a great idea.
Thanks, guys. I think it's just exciting to get to connect our people together.
Yeah.
Doug Leonard, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, Lisa and Phil. Good to see you both.
Doug. You too.
Quick question. I just wondered if the WCRC is still organizing the Washington, D.C. Advocacy Days.
We did back in 2018. In fact, I can tell you it's part of my password on my computer, but no, 2019. Whatever, doesn't matter. We did a Witness at the Border event. I went, as well as the then convener from CANAAC, and we had some other people, and we actually went to the border and a place in El Paso where the wall was, and we tried to have a communion service across the border, and ended up the people from Mexico couldn't come, but they had 2 kids that shared it with us, went through the wall. But we did meet with people in El Paso and tried to talk about it. Then we went from there to the U.S. Congress, and we did advocate with whoever would meet with us. And we did meet with some people to advocate with respect to the issue at the border. Now, that's been a few years, different administration, but we did get some, I'm remembering one congressman from Michigan and one from somewhere else, where we did get some traction, I think, in the way they were advocating at the in the Congress. So yes, we tried to do that. Haven't done it very recently, but that's another thing to put back on our list, I think. So thanks for that, Doug.
Yeah, because I think that'd be a great way for members of churches to get involved directly to DC and learn about the work and do some advocacy while they're there with their own senators.
Yeah,
Good idea.
Both those advocacy days, and also there are various events at the United Nations too that we partner with the PCUSA, who has an office there, and the WCC's presence as well, and try and coordinate with them even when we can't be there. We don't pay the PCUSA's UN person. We do have a memorandum of understanding with them that they'll advocate on our behalf on certain issues as well. So there's some coordination there. And I know at least with a number of the women's gathering and maybe a couple others, churches are invited in, heavily PCUSA, but that wouldn't preclude others, RCA, CRC, or anyone else joining in. The more the merrier when you're trying to, get your point across, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about the WCC. We used to organize the UN Advocacy Days and the symposium. Those are great ways for people to get engaged.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we are just a little bit past our time, but we have one other person who's been patiently waiting. And she has a little bit of experience with ecumenical work. Monica Scott-Pierce.
Hey, Monica.
Hi, thank you, Phil and Lisa. Good to see you on my screen, and James, you as well. And I'm so grateful for the work of the WCRC, and was happy to be with you all in May. Was it May? Is that what it was?
Mm-hmm.
And also to see a few folks at the Global Christian Forum as well, which was in April. So I think it's wonderful to see that the WCRC is engaging regionally and also globally in a number of different locations and with different ecumenical groups. And that is related to my question, which has to do with some anniversaries that are coming up. And I'm wondering if the WCRC is involved with any of the celebrations or ecumenical dialogue around the 1700th anniversary of Nicaea. And also we're coming up on the 500th anniversary of the beginning of Anabaptism. And I think these are significant theological divisions, but also Nicaea represents some unity as well that continue on many, many years later. And so I'm just wondering what our Reform partners are doing through the WCRC to recognize those anniversaries.
The World Council of Churches is taking the lead in the Nicaea 1700. There's some unfortunate timing in that. I think we'll have some people involved, but that celebration is happening, I think, the week following the General Council meeting of the WCRC in Chiang Mai, and they're going to be in Egypt, Alexandria, maybe. So we're not going to be directly involved. The Nicaea is, bigger than Reformed and allows the Orthodox an easy entry in as well, which is helpful for the WCC. So they're taking the lead on that one. With the Anabaptists and all that, the dialogue we've got going with the Mennonites is specifically geared towards that. And I believe that'll be a component of our General Council, of the General Council meeting next year. Some admittance of guilt, requests for reconciliation and forgiveness, and then looking forward to the future where we can move together on issues, because we're more alike than we're not in the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I think
when we met in Zurich a few years back too, that was on our there was actually a movie that came out about Zwingli that we were able to watch. And so I think, but then the RCA had started that, I think, under your time, Monica, right? As so yes, it definitely is on our radar. And I'm not exactly sure all of the things, but yeah, it is there.
Yeah. And I appreciate also how the WCRC and global bodies like the WCRC are leading in these areas and reminding us of the need to have dialogue around historic harm that has been done. And also just to remind us of our call to our global brothers and sisters around the world, right? Through things like the Accra Confession. Because although the local is, of course, very, very important, and we've been talking quite a bit about that, the global concerns that you all are addressing are sometimes a way of calling at least the U.S. church to be more aware of what is happening around the world, the plight of Christians around the world, and how we can address those issues.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
And thank you, Monica, and thank you, Phil and Lisa, and everybody who's been able to be here. This was a lovely discussion. I'm so glad we could have it. Remember, everybody, that like all Reformed Church Center programs, this recording will in a couple of days be up online at nbts.edu, and you can find it and look at parts of it again, or tell other folks who missed today where they can come and find it and find out more. Thank you all for being here. I hope to see many of you next month or in January, and or if not see you, at least hear you. And have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thank you, James, for providing this opportunity for us. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much.
Bye, everyone.